This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times no matter when.
Hi, everyone. As I didn't finish last week, which seems to be my ongoing problem, I reorganized. I switched lecture 4 and 5, so marriage will be next week, because I thought Marie de Medici fit better with heroines and saints rather than marriage. And the other thing that I have been fascinated by is there's very little written about Marie de Medici. Lots written about Catherine de Medici and her relationship with Elizabeth Tudor, and her diplomacy and skillful political maneuvering. But for Marie, not so much. And I think in more ways than one, Marie was brilliant in hiring Rubens, because perhaps if she hadn't hired Rubens to paint her history, we might know even less about her. So let's go forward and meet our last Medici lady. So Marie de Medici was born in 1575, the 6th daughter of Francesco I de Medici and his wife Joanna of Austria. As was wont to happen to women, Joanna died in 1578, so that made Marie only 3. And Francesco, who had been carrying on, as men were wont to do, with his mistress Bianca Capello, he then proceeded to make her legitimate and married Bianca. And then not so long after, he and Bianca and Francesco both died of malaria, but we're always questioning whether it was malaria or poison. It was a really difficult time to live then. And in 1600, Marie was betrothed to Henry IV, Henry of Navarre, King of France. And her marriage was arranged by Ferdinando de Medici, the heir of Francesco's son. And the reason for this, because unusually Marie was not so young. So she wasn't a 15-year-old girl. And Henry, had already been married. And there was something known as the royal divorce, because his wife, then daughter of Catherine de Medici, didn't seem to be able to have children. So Ferdinando arranged this marriage, and it was in his interest as well as France's, because it forgave an enormous debt that that France had to the Medici. Then, not so long after their marriage, so 10 years later, and the day after Marie de Medici's coronation, Henry was assassinated. Her son Louis was only 8. She immediately proclaimed herself regent for her son, the future Louis XIII, a position she held officially until 1614. However, she did not want to step aside, and she, continued her husband's policy of religious toleration. Didn't work. I mean, what I did not realize is France was basically torn apart for this entire century with religious battles, violent and horrendous. So it was an incredible time of strife, and France was caught between England and Spain, not knowing whether it would be in their best interest to make peace with Spain, but that would tick off England. So that, Catherine certainly dallied closer to England, but Marie, also Catholic, was more focused towards Spain. In 1617, things just blew up. Louis had enough of his meddling mother, and he exiled her to Blois until 1621. So for 4 years, she was basically under house arrest at the Chateau de Blois. And then they managed to make peace, and she returned to Paris in 1621. But then it didn't get better. They kept battling. I think her son Louis was trying to make more successful peace, and he finally banned her from France in 1631, and she died in exile in Brussels. Not a great story. But we're going to look at what she did when she returned back to Paris in 1621. She was allowed to return, and she put all her energies on continuing the building project of Luxembourg Palace, which was inspired by her home, the Pitti Palace in Florence. And she used it, not only the architecture, but the decoration as a demonstration of her political power. Propaganda at its best, and we could also say a total rewriting of history. She commissioned Rubens. She was a smart, savvy Medici. She knew her artist. She commissioned Rubens to paint a series of canvases initially planned to depict both the life of her husband and that of herself. The series of her husband's life was never even begun. Her life was completed in 1624. So imagine, Rubens painted 24 canvases in 3 years. And she also was busy arranging marriages that were not as successful as her predecessor, Catherine. So now these canvases are no longer in the Palais Luxembourg. They are in the Louvre. And my understanding is they've been recently restored and are absolutely magnificent to behold. So they are masterpieces of Baroque art. So we're in the 17th century now. So it's the volume has been turned up. Rubens was extremely influenced by Italian Renaissance art, but knew particularly with this commission that he had a big job to disguise the rather mundane, we could even say boring life of Marie and controversial reputation of Marie and turn it into something glorious. So visual propaganda at its best, and perhaps even, a rewriting of history or a deliberate concealment, because these images had to disguise all the political reality, the religious dissension, the intrigue at court, and present Marie as the queen in control. And the purpose was to convince the public, the public that she chose, of her right to rule as her son's regent. And Rubens wrote in a letter to Nicolas Claude Fabry de Perèche, "The king did me the honor of coming to see our gallery in his first visit to the Luxembourg Palace. His Majesty appeared to be very pleased with our paintings, as I was told by all those who were present, and in particular Monsieur de Saint-Ambroise, who served as interpreter." Now that's important, interpreter of the subjects, and who most artfully diverted and dissimulated their real meaning. So we're going to be looking at a series of images that are layered in their meanings. They were located in that corridor. The pink arrow is pointing towards corridor number 11. The pink square was Marie de Medici's bedroom, and below that is her study. So this was in her private area of Luxembourg Palace. So we could say public, but you were only allowed to wander the corridors, number 11, by invitation of the Queen. And as good Renaissance art and Baroque art typically is the result of humanist advisors, here it was political and humanist advisors, mainly Cardinal Richelieu and Pierre Dupuy, along with Rubens, who was a master at iconography, and Marie herself. So we're going to have to kind of unravel or unpack the layered meanings of these very large images and try and understand how Rubens took a life that really wasn't spectacular and turned it into a visual spectacular presentation. We're going to start So you know I'm not reading into Rubens. We're going to start with this. This is not part of the Marie de Medici cycle. This is the consequences of war that he painted for Marie's cousin, Ferdinando de Medici, the one who arranged her marriage. And we have a letter written by Rubens. I think I've read this before to you. It's in your outline, so it's not going to be on the screen, to Justice Sustermans to explain this image. And this is really one of the most valuable documents we have because it justifies what our historians try to do. So let me just read this to you and try and help you see what Rubens is explaining. So this is his letter from 1638. The main figure is Mars. He's in the center with the helmet. In leaving the temple of Janus open, which during peacetime was closed according to the Roman custom, to the left you see the open door to the temple of Janus, Mars moves forth with his blood-soaked sword and shield to threaten villagers with great disaster. He pays little attention to his lover, Venus, who tries to hold him back with gentle caresses, accompanied by amours and cupids. On his other side, Mars is tugged by one of the three Furies, Alecto, who holds aloft a torch. Monsters float alongside him, representing pestilence and famine, inseparable companions of war. A woman lies beneath him holding a broken lute. It's upside down on the bottom, which represents harmony broken, something which is incompatible with the discord of war. Lying also beneath him is a mother with her baby in her arms, demonstrating that fruitfulness, fertility, and charity are thwarted by war, which corrupts and destroys everything in its path. There is also an architect on the ground clutching his tools, as if to portray the idea that all the efforts made to construct and decorate cities during peacetime is torn to the ground by the violence of the military. I believe, if I remember correctly, that your grace will also find a book beneath Mars' feet, along with a few paper sketches. This implies that he is trampling over literature and the arts. There should also be a bundle of arrows or darts, once held together by a broken rope. If the arrows had remained tied together, this would have been an emblem of the goddess Concord, as are the caduceus and the olive branch which lie beside them, symbols of peace. Both of these have also been cast onto the ground. The mournful woman dressed in black, her veil torn and her body stripped of her jewels or any kind of ornamentation, is the discontented Europe, who has already been suffering for a number of years from devastation, outrage, and misery. These factors are so harmful to all that they need no further specification. Her distinctive symbol is the globe, held up by a small angel or genie, with a cross at its peak, representing the Christian orb. This is as much as I can say to your grace about this piece, and it seems a little too much. And if it seems a little too much, grace and your wisdom will easily have understood the concept. Okay, so Rubens knows what he's doing, and I can assure you Marie de Medici would have vetoed this picture, although this painting absolutely represents what's going on in Europe and particularly in France. So let's turn to her series of 24 canvases, which consists of 3 portraits, one of Marie, one of her father, and one of her mother, and 21 narrative scenes. So we begin with her birth, and then we go all the way through, ending with a reconciliation between her son Louis and herself, called the truth, the reconciliation and truth. So how does Rubens do this? How does he disguise political and historical reality and present Marie as a peacekeeper, as a bringer of the golden age? And he turns to classical vocabulary, but in a different way than was done for Catherine. So Marie had the advantage of Rubens' genius, and Catherine did not have artists of that caliber in terms of expertise and kind of iconographical knowledge, so that she actually was visualized as by a metaphor of her as the Artemisia that we saw last time. But now we're going to see Marie cavorting with gods and goddesses and symbols of wisdom. Okay, we're not going to, you have the list of all of them. I'm doing quite a few, but not all. So we're skipping her birth, and we're looking at the second panel, the education of the princess. And here we see little Marie in her red dress, kind of a miniature adult, surrounded by those who were educating her to have that political royal career that lay in her destiny. So we see Apollo playing a cello unusually. He is presenting her to the Graces, who bring beauty and chastity and harmony to her. He is also the god of harmony and poetry. So this takes place at Mount Parnassus. And she is at the knees of Minerva. Minerva is teaching her the wisdom that she will need to be Queen of France and regent to her son, Louis XIII. And swooping down from above is Mercury, the god of eloquence, who will teach her speech making and give her the skills of eloquence that she will need as regent, as queen and regent. All the classical vocabulary is being utilized by Rubens here in this marvelous composition, where the gods and the goddesses really dominate. It's almost difficult to find Marie in this panoply of mythological figures. And in the foreground, we have more musical instruments. We have the paintbrushes, we have sculpture, all referencing that she will be educated in the arts as well as philosophy and diplomacy. And in fact, that bust is a bust of Plato, which is also referencing the passage in Plato's Republic on the education of a prince or of a youth. And Plato is somewhat looking towards the Medusa shield, which is also a symbol of philosophy. So Marie de' Medici in Florence received the education that would give her the necessary skills to be a successful and powerful queen and regent. So then we have to get around to the arranged marriage. And this is the presentation of the portrait of Marie to Henry IV, King of France. So the portrait is presented to him by the gods Hymen and Cupid, gods of marriage and love. And certainly Cupid's arrow has hit its mark, because Henry is depicted as smitten. Totally not true. Jupiter and Juno in the sky above look down with approval. The eagle, remember, Jupiter is never faithful. The eagle turns away, whereas Juno, with her two peacocks, her peacock carriage, looks down on Henry and on this liaison. And there are some wonderful details. I mean, this is what I love about Rubens, is notice that her peacocks are bound to each other by a pink ribbon. And her chariot has, it's a little hard to see, an image in gold just under that peacock's head. And that is Cupid with a yoke. Now, when we look at marriage imagery, we're going to see an image of Cupid with the yoke. So it's really foreshadowing the marriage between Marie and Henry. Behind Henry stands France, who urges him to turn away from battle. And you see the little putti playing with his shield and his helmet below. And so Henry is being presented really as Mars, and his Venus will be Marie, and they will bring a new golden age and of peace and harmony to France. We wish. Because we have to remember a little of the detail of Henry. Remember, Henry is a Bourbon, not a Valois. And he was married, his first marriage was to the daughter of Catherine de' Medici, Margaret of Valois. They married in 1572, right after, and 6 days later, what was the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. So what an inauspicious way to start a marriage. They did not relate to each other. They were infertile. They had religious differences. He was Protestant, she was Catholic, and they finally agreed, or she was forced into a royal divorce in 1599. And Henry is quoted here by God, let it be. There is nothing to be done about it, because for the good of my kingdom and my peoples, you say I must be married, so I simply must. So the divorce occurred in 1599, and he was very quickly betrothed to Marie de' Medici. He also ultimately converted to Catholicism. Marie was Catholic as well. This did not help with the religious strife in France, because the Protestants and the Catholics continued to battle each other throughout the century. But it did forgive an enormous debt that France owed Francesco de' Medici, and she came with her with a huge dowry, and she's in that Medici family. Remember, Eleonora of Toledo was known as La Feconda, so they felt pretty safe that she would be able to produce heirs to the throne. Okay, so next image is her arrival at Marseille. So you can imagine she arrived, she stepped on the ship probably in Livorno, and with a flotilla of accompanying ships, she sailed to Marseille and arrived in November 3rd, 1600. She arrived with her sister, the Duchess of Mantua, and Grand Duchess of Tuscany, and is welcomed here. So the Grand Duchess of Tuscany is in the black dress or the dark dress, and she's welcomed by France with this city allegory of the city of Marseille behind. So France, with the fleur-de-lis cape, bows down before her with outstretched arms, welcoming her to French soil. Above, fame blows two trumpets announcing the arrival of this bringer of a dynasty and bringer of a golden age. Now, again, just like Marie was a little hard to see in The Education of a Princess, here, I would imagine most people spend most of their time looking at Neptune and his Nereids, who in their Rubenesque flesh cavort below the gangplank, singing their praises of Marie, who will bring peace and a golden age to France. And if you look closely in part of the sculpture of the boat, their fortune is carved, blessing, holding the rudder of the ship and bringing good fortune to France as well. We see the Medici coat of arms in the upper left, and everybody's in enormous excitement that she is bringing all the best to France. So then they have to meet, because Henry did not bother to go to Marseille. In fact, it took him kind of a while to get around to meeting Marie. He didn't meet her until a week after she arrived, because he was much busier with his mistress, Gabrielle d'Estrées. So here now, Marie and Henry have been elevated to the status, to the situation of Jupiter and Juno that we saw in the presentation of the portrait. So now it is Marie and Henry in the sky with Juno's peacock carriage, and Marie bows down to Henry. So they have become gods in their own right, and they are being united by the goddess, either Venus or Hymen, and their fertility is proclaimed by all the putti around them. The rainbow is a symbol of peace and concord, and the star above is Hesperus, and the planet Venus in the western sky. So all the auspices are there to bless this union for the good of France. In the lower left is a rather detailed depiction of Lyon, where the meeting took place, and Rubens highlights or does a little play on words, the lions drawing the carriage with Hymen there is actually a link to the name of Lyon. And of course, the Cupids or the putti with their flames are taming these vicious lions, just as Marie will do with France. And she did what she needed to do. She gave birth to Louis the future Louis XIII at Fontainebleau. And here she looks a little tired, but very proud of herself. She's done her duty. Behind her is Sybil, the great goddess. And I love that fantastic red curtain that kind of frames this fertile message, because abundance or fecundity is pressing that beautiful cornucopia of flowers towards Marie. She doesn't have to look at it. She's looking toward her baby. And Rubens seems to like snakes. I don't like snakes, so I always have a problem looking at these figures. But that snake, again, is a symbol of health and eternity, that image of the snake that goes around and eats its own tail, and the little dog, a symbol of fidelity. Apollo ascends in the sky as the figure of day with the wings draws back the cloak of night. This is the dawn of a new day. She's produced the future heir of France and promises a new day of peace and a return of justice. Now you have to look carefully. So that you see the baby and the snake, and the figure behind holds the scales of justice. So all of Rubens is able to pack his images with all the symbols that need to be often explained, but he does it in such an effortless way. And the other thing that I love is look at his fabrics, look at the oriental carpet, and my favorite detail is look how her feet, she's in her bedroom slippers. So she's had her child, she's in a informal clothing with fabulous fabrics, and her feet are slipping in and out of her bedroom slippers. Okay, Louis grows up a bit, and here we have Henry entrusting Marie with the regency and the care of Louis. So now this is not Marie grabbing the position of regent, that she is instructing Rubens to present Henry as wanting this, based on a medal where Henry is Mars and Marie is Minerva, and Louis stands between. This also goes back to Roman coins as well. And Henry passes the orbit mundi, the orb of power, earthly power, to Marie. And this is the first time that the orb has been used in this way. Looking out at us is Providentia, providence, with, it's very hard to see, an eye crown, which is the symbol of the eye of Osiris, which was a typical Medici symbol. So these ladies, Catherine and then our Marie here, were trained in the Medici court, trained on how to use art to their best advantage, how art could effectively operate as propaganda. What I found interesting was Rubens had intended to have the fates behind Henry but he was instructed either by Richelieu or Marie herself to replace the fates with soldiers. So to make it more kind of earthly and historical, so really as a document that this is Henry passing the regency to Marie. This one we're just going to look at very quickly. It just makes me think of Napoleon's image, which is why I had to show it to you. When you think of that enormous painting of the coronation of Josephine, clearly Napoleon instructed David to look at Rubens, because here is Marie's coronation, which occurred on May 13th, 1610. And there is Henry in the tribune above, sanctioning the event. Abundance and victories hover above, showering Marie with the blessings of peace and prosperity. Portraits abound. Allegories and personifications are here, kept to a minimum, kind of like the replacement of the Furies with the soldiers to make it less allegorical and more historical. So here too, the gods and goddesses are only there in abundance and victory. Everybody else is human and of the moment. Now, one day later, May 14th, Henry was assassinated by a Catholic zealot named Francois Ravaillac. And here we have probably the most important painting of this series, the apotheosis of Henry and the proclamation of regency. So we already saw that Henry had given the regency to Catherine, but now it's made even clearer with the death of Henry. So hugely wide horizontal canvas. On the left is Henry's side, and on the right is Catherine's side. So Jupiter and Saturn welcome Henry, or carry Henry up towards Olympus like a Roman emperor, towards that wonderful celestial arch of the zodiac, towards, we're going to see a detail, Hercules and Mercury. Jupiter, as we've seen, is Henry's celestial counterpart. Remember that Henry actually was depicted in the guise of Jupiter. And Saturn is the god of time. So Henry's time on Earth is finite, is up, and he's being carried towards Olympus. Below, Bellona, the goddess of war, nude, cowers in despair. Oh my God, what will become of France with the death of Henry? So Henry chose Hercules as a symbol, and we saw that also as Catherine's husband also used Hercules as a symbol, able to overcome all challenges, and a protector of the faith and restorer of peace. Hercules above is that powerful god towards whom Henry is being carried, and Mercury, the god of wisdom and the god of eloquence. So Henry's, by being welcomed by Hercules and Mercury, his reputation during his life is being celebrated by the gods as well. The snake, or the serpent below, is a symbol of his murderer, Ravaillac. And it's down here where we get all these symbols. Victory in gold holds a palm frond. So victory is not soaring above. Victory is on the ground, looking up, going, oh dear, and holding the symbol of martyrdom, because Henry has become a Christian and pagan martyr in losing, no longer victorious. And Bellona, the goddess of war, is in despair. What is she to do? She looks, most people would imagine that is Venus, but she is not. She has been unable to keep Mars in battle. And the dog shows her fidelity to France, which we'll see in a moment. Okay, now we're on the side of Marie. which is let me just go back. Look how different these two signs are. And if we just, one has an upward movement and is chaotic, and the other is grounded, triumphant, and everyone is looking up towards Marie. So all of the nobility, the gods are not so visible on this side because Marie wants the historical reality manipulated and evident. So nobles from the court gather at her feet, asking her to step in as regent. It's interesting, she has a gesture in her hands, which is of humility, but there's a part of me that it also looks like she's holding a child. So her status as mother of the future king is kind of made visible there as well. France on the left, bare-breasted, wearing the fleur-de-lis and the helmet, hands her the same orb that Henry 2 scenes ago handed her when he gave her the authority of the regency. Medusa's shield means she will defend France against all enemies. Beside her stands, again behind her, under the triumphal arch, is public health, salus publica. So saying that Marie will bring public health to France, and wisdom from Minerva, who stands behind her. And the wisdom is emphasized by those twisted columns, Psalmic columns. Also in St. Peter's, Marie knows her Italian art. And here you have Marie sitting on the throne of wisdom. She's kind of a Virgin Mary figure. She will heal France. This is the empowerment of women, but really of Marie. And of course, Rubens knows his sculpture. And when you look at his kind of figures that are in twisting poses, you immediately think of the famous statue of Laocoon that was discovered in 1508 in a vineyard in Rome. And Michelangelo was witness to its unearthing. Now, we also have a very subtle emphasis here where Marie is enthroned and her head is higher than that of Henry. So Henry might be going up to Olympus, but she is grounded, enthroned, and at a higher level than he. Now, how does this relate to the historical reality? Well, she was Italian, and you know those French, they don't like foreigners. So she was hated by the French. And no female could be a queen of France under Salic law. It's not England. There could never have been an Elizabeth in France, forbidden. So the only way these women gained power was by marrying a king and being a regent for their young children, sons. She also was not really good at finances, nor was Catherine. Catherine de Medici ran France into incredible debt through all of her magnificences, which she felt were essential to convince the French that everything was doing well. So this kind of building of Luxembourg and these kinds of paintings are also similar in their effect of running through the coffers and constant battles, and just using the arts and celebrations to disguise political reality. She also was not the best at foreign diplomacy because she kept going back and forth between Protestants and Catholics, and should she ally France with Spain or not. And it got messy enough that finally, as we learned, Louis was of age, and he exiled her in 1617 and executed her two favorite advisors. We are living in a world of violence. I guess we are now here too, but slightly different. The next image we're going to look at is the regent militant. And this is actually one of my favorites, because how often do you see a woman astride a white steed, carrying a baton of command. She has appropriated male iconography. She is there in the triumphal adventus of Roman emperors. She has a sphinx-like crest on her helmet. She is crowned with laurel by victory. And again, Rubens has included an accurate representation of the Austrian town of, I don't know how to pronounce this, Julier or Julich, which was defeated by France, but they then reached an agreement. And so what we see then is France and Austria clasping hands, and the victory being the eagle hovering over the city, foretelling the victory. This is Marie's only military undertaking. And she captured Julius and returned it to the Protestant princes in hopes of putting an end to the constant religious wars that went on throughout the century. And she did this soon when she had just stepped in as regent, soon after the assassination of her husband. Now, Rubens had planned to paint the expulsion of Marie from Paris by Louis in 1617. Well, you can imagine Marie said, no, you're not painting that. That does not make me look good. So she gave him a new topic, and this is the felicity of the Regency, pure propaganda. Marie as the patroness of the fine arts. And this is actually one of the most crowded, cluttered, hard to unravel of the images. And she sits there enthroned, holding the scale of justice. She's crowned, she's got the scepter and the orb. So, and trumpets blare above her, cornucopia present her as bringing fertility and abundance to France, and they stamp on the envy, the vices. So again, what a contradiction, or what a contrast to what Rubens had planned when she's getting exiled to Blois, and rather he is commissioned to present the flowering of France under Marie's divine perfect rule. And here she hands the rudder of the ship to her son, but her son looks really overwhelmed by an awful lot of powerful women. So really, the strength in this image is Marie in the center with Minerva behind, and these powerful women rowing the ship of state. There is no room for Louis to take control. Religion turns to look at Louis. Temperance or prudence trims the sail. Fame trumpets in the air. And France, with a flaming torch, looking like Minerva, stands midship. What chance does Louis have against this powerful array of women? The fact that Marie bows her head to her son really doesn't change the overwhelming effect of these incredibly voluptuous women who are guiding the ship of state. The historical reality: Louis organized a coup d'etat, assassinated Marie's closest advisor, Concino Concini, and exiled her to Blois. And in 1619 to 20, Marie slipped out of Blois, here aided by Minerva. It's looking like it was all blessed by fame in France and all was going to go smoothly, but no, her night flight set off the wars of 1619 to 20, and it took years of negotiation to reach the Treaty of Angoulême and the Peace of Angers, which are then represented here, where finally Louis and his mother are reconciled. Here you see at the Treaty of Angoulême, Marie and Louis coming together, and the Civil War ending under that triumphal arch. And then the Temple of Peace, where the Augustan security sits enthroned within the Temple of Peace, and Marie approaches with Mercury, and the vices are off on the right. Blind, furor, fraud, and invidia are being banned from the temple, and peace torches the arms, all leading us to the Triumph of Truth, an interesting title, the Triumph of Truth, which is finally Louis and his mother make peace in heaven. And they hold between them the symbol of Concordia with the laurel wreath, the bound hands clasped underneath, holding the candle, or holding the flaming heart, which is the Egyptian symbol of heaven. They reach a final definitive peace, which was made possible by the death of some key advisors, Charles d'Albert, Duke of Lorraine, and the Constable of France. So if we end with Marie as Bologna, the overall theme, going strongly against historical reality, was that through her wise counsel and her regency and the ideal statesmanship that she brought from her Medici training, she carried France to victory and to peace. Not the reality, but what an extraordinary tour de force of Rubens. So I think Rubens is the hero here, as he, in 3 years, managed to create this immense series that present his patroness, Marie, as queen consort, royal mother, valiant widow, and governing regent. He incorporates the iconography of the Virgin Mary, Minerva, Juno, the Graces, Justice, Bologna, all in the service of Marie. Okay, I think we should take a brief break right now before we look at Old Testament heroines and later, and finally some saints. Okay, does that work? So say reconvene at 5 of 11. And
Sounds good.
Okay, I can look at the chat. Okay. No, the letter was not addressed to Marie. It had nothing to do with Marie. It was to another artist, Justus Susterman. And the painting, The Ills of War, was commissioned for Ferdinando de' Medici. Yes, Henry IV vacillated. He was raised Protestant, so he was a Huguenot. He sympathized with the Huguenots, but ultimately he had to convert to Catholicism. It's very confusing history. I struggle with it, and I had no idea that the wars of religion, I mean, they list them. The first war, the second war, they go up to like 10 wars of religion. So the entire 16th, 17th century, France was torn apart by religious warfare. I'm happy to answer any other questions. We're back, and we're leaving Rubens and returning to the 16th century. And I just want to pose some questions. Why do you think women killing themselves or being raped tortured. Why were these images and subjects that were so popular, as you will see? So many of these women are actually performing acts that were traditionally associated with men. And so they were celebrated for courage. They were exempla of virtues, but there's also an aspect of these women as victims, martyrs, slaves, rape victims, that I just want to think about this as we go through these images and these stories. You have an enormous handout because I gave you all of these women's stories and the sources of their stories. So we're going to start with Lucretia. So I'm showing you two earlier images of Lucretia, one on the left with a very large sword, and the others as kind of a pure martyr with the blood flowing from her wrists. So her husband, Collatinus, was so proud of his virtuous, beautiful wife that he boasted of her virtue and invited his companions to visit her. Sextus Tarquinius, the son of the Etruscan king, was one of Collatinus's buddies, and he decided that Lucretia was gorgeous and he was going to test her virtue, and he returned uninvited. And he propositioned her and told her that if she refused, he would kill both her and her servant, placing their naked bodies together so that it appeared that they were having an adulterous affair. Or if she would succumb and appear innocent, she could succumb and appear innocent. So he was just, threatening her. She chose silent rhetoric and public death to safeguard her husband's name. So Sextus Tarquinius raped Lucretia. She told her husband and told him that she must kill herself so to preserve his reputation. And according to Livy, though I acquit myself of the sin, I do not absolve myself from the punishment, nor in time to come shall ever unchaste women live through the example of Lucretia, what remains of a woman after she has lost her honor. So after her death, her kinsmen swore vengeance against Tarquin, and led by Brutus, they threw out the Etruscan king and established the Roman Republic. Now, St. Augustine viewed Lucretia slightly differently. There were two, but the adultery was committed only by one. But this case of Lucretia is in such a dilemma that if you extenuate the homicide, you confirm the adultery. If you acquit her of adultery, you make the charge of homicide heavier, and there is no way out of the dilemma. When one asks if she was adulterous, why praise her? If chaste, why slay her? So she is a very complex heroine for Christians to understand. But she was an extremely popular image, both for brides, for wedding imagery, and for individual paintings for private enjoyment. So we start with Botticelli's Cassone painting, The Story of Lucretia, which must have been commissioned for a wedding. And here, the emphasis is not on her suicide, although she lies there dead, but really an emphasis on the establishment of the Republic. So acknowledging Florence as a republic, and acknowledging the role of Lucretia's death, and presenting her there as the exemplum of a virtuous wife. Suicide is not represented, but the triumph of the Republic, with the triumphal arch behind, this figure of David standing above. This must have been commissioned for a prominent Florentine family, and committed to the Republic of Florence. So this is 15th century. It is before the Medici rulership. And now we jump quite far from the 15th century to early Titian's Lucretia. And now we're into this category of sensual, beautiful women, given a justification by the identity of her as Lucretia. Who is the man? Is it her husband, Collatinus, or is it Tarquinius? And look at how that man has the red, which is alluding to the future rape. And we feel like we are as close to Lucretia as that man behind her. So this is really painted, I would submit to you, for male viewing. Possibly this could also be a marriage-related image, that she is the example of a virtuous wife, and that this could have been hung in the marriage chamber, because more and more we are learning that these, particularly these Venetian beautiful women, sensuous and delectable, were not courtesans, most likely, although Lucretia was one of the most popular names for Venetian courtesans, but more likely that these were private commissions for bedroom viewing. Or looking at the northern infatuation with Lucretia, these are all by Lucas Cranach. In fact, there are some 35 versions of Lucretia painted by Lucas Cranach. Now, that pretty much underscores that this was a subject in high demand. And I just want you to look at these and wonder, why would you want this in your house? Why, as a man, do you want a woman about to commit suicide? Or how would this make the wives, the brides, feel as they're looking at this horrendous story of a violated woman who, to keep her honor and the honor of her husband, needs to kill herself? So I find it fascinating. It does bring up some of my more feminist views. One really does wonder, when maybe the men in the classroom can answer this when we finish. Is there something appealing about a woman willing to kill herself for you? Not sure, because certainly these Cranachs are sensual. These women, Lucretia is decked out in Renaissance clothing, very provocative velvet and fur. Hold on to that when we look at Giorgione's Laura next week. And they look at us. Lucretia is kind of looking straight at the viewer, particularly the one in the center, and kind of challenging. And look how sensual that picture is. I mean, this is Northern aesthetics. This is not the flesh of Titian, but look at that transparent drapery, that hint of her private parts as she kind of tantalizes the viewer. And she, as this virtuous wife, that it was better to die than to live in disgrace. Just raising some really, I think, really interesting questions. When we turn to Raphael and the High Renaissance, we see this wonderful drawing by Raphael of Lucretia on the left, where he changes the iconography. And it becomes a really important prototype for later artists, because it was engraved by Marcantonio Raimondi, who was in Raphael's studio. And as Vasari says, but to return to Marcantonio, on his arrival in Rome, he engraved in copper a most beautiful sheet by Raphael of Urbino, in which was represented a Roman Lucretia killing herself, done with such diligence and beautiful manner that on its being immediately brought to Raphael by some of his friends, he was inclined to have some drawings of his things produced in print. Now, I would submit to you that she is he separates in a way the suicide by having her arm outstretched. We're less aware of her imminent death, and she feels more victorious in her pose. He's chosen this dramatic moment. He's idealized her. He's shown her in classical garb. So it's a very different sense of her than either Cranach or Titian. But Titian seems to have known this work, probably through the Raimondi engraving. And I show you its question. This image on the left has been attributed to Titian, but also to Francesco di Gregorio Vecellio from 1525. And it was in the Gonzaga collection. We know the Gonzagas liked sensuous imagery, possibly commissioned by Federico or even Isabella d'Este herself. 5 copies or versions of this painting exist. Clearly evocative of classical sculpture. I show you the Aphrodite of Cyrene, and another Titian a little earlier of his Venus Anadyomene. I really struggle with Greek. And in fact, all of these images, beginning with the Raphael, were inspired by the discovery of an ancient statue, now lost, that was owned by Leo X. It was identified as Lucretia. And so this was part of the revival of antiquity. And with Raphael and Titian, I think we're much more in the realm of a Venus-like figure rather than a Lucretia. But it's here. These are identified as Lucretia. And the interesting aspect of the Titian is that Lucretia is hiding her eyes. And that has a classical source as well. And Alberti tells us, they praised Timantes of Cyprus because when he had made Calchas sad, and Ulysses even sadder at the sacrifice of Iphigenia, and employed all his art and ingenious on the grief-stricken Menelaus, he could find no suitable way to represent the expression of her disconsolate father. So he covered his head with a veil, and thus left more for the onlooker to imagine about his grief than he could see with the eyes. So here, Titian clearly seems to be veiling her eyes, that in a way to draw the viewer in, to imagine what she was feeling just before she committed suicide. It also makes her not look at us like Cranach's Lucretia, so that the viewer, male or female, can rest their eyes on her beautiful body without the interruption or the challenge of her gaze. So we have this really complicated contrast between the beauty of this figure and the imminent violence. And she's very Venus-like. And is she there standing as a symbol of marital chastity? Is she there as a beautiful woman to entice marital sex? It's really a fascinating conundrum and contrast. But clearly, I don't think she's that easily identified as Lucretia. She is there standing as this incredibly beautiful nude female. Now we have a very different kind of Lucretia that brings a whole nother list of issues with it. So this is Lorenzo Lotto's portrait of a woman inspired by Lucretia. Lorenzo Lotto is a fascinating artist. He always does things a bit outside of the box. He didn't live in Venice, but most of his patrons were Venetians. And here we have a woman dressed in contemporary Venetian clothing with the kind of headdress balzo like Isabella d'Este liked. And she aggressively looks out at us, and she holds in her hand a drawing of Lucretia, similar to really Raphael and Titian's Lucretia's, drawing attention, saying, hey, I am Lucretia. And she points to a text, a folded piece of paper that has Lucretia's last words, saying, following Lucretia's example, no woman will ever live in dishonor. So I find this a very complicated quotation, meaning if you're dishonored, you have to kill yourself, or has Lucretia absolved women from dishonor? I think that's what I would like it to mean, but probably that doesn't mean it. So that now we come into other arguments from the 21st and 20th century. Is this a portrait? Is it a portrait of a woman named Lucretia? Scholars like to find the identities of these sitters, and she has been possibly identified as the Venetian patrician Lucrezia Valier, who married Benedetto Pesaro in 1533. So is this a marriage portrait? And she is aggressively defending her virtue and her marital chastity. Other scholars have said, is this a courtesan? Because Lucretia was such a popular name for courtesans. And the reasons behind the courtesan identification are the aggressive stance and expression, the fact that her jewelry is not hung around her waist or neck, but rather hung inside her bodice, rather provocative. And that she has a golden yellow transparent scarf. And yellow was typically associated both with courtesans and with Jews. But there's another way of looking at it, because that yellow flower was often, I think it's called a gilly flower, and was a typical gift of one's lover and a symbol of earthly love. Does this make her a courtesan, or does this make her a bride? Is her necklace, which has a pearl and a ruby, evocative of illicit love, or is it a marriage gift? And rather than bearing her breasts by hanging inside her bodice, is that her acceptance of her husband's desire? And then those slash sleeves, don't forget Raphael's Donna Volata, those slash sleeves are very evocative, erotic. And that empty chair against which she leans, is that her absent husband? So we're in this struggle to understand whether our view of erotic art or eroticism in art makes all of these images courtesans, because we don't understand how the Renaissance truly viewed sexuality and eroticism within the marriage. So does she look like she's going to kill herself? I don't think so. I think she's drawing attention to her virtue, which would make me lean towards this as a marriage portrait. So I think I wanted to show you a close-up of her face. And now I have something funny, I think. How long ago, do any of you remember this movie, Elizabeth Taylor as in The Taming of the Shrew by Zeffirelli? Well, little did I know that the dress that Elizabeth Taylor wore was inspired by Lorenzo Lotto's painting, right down to the similar kind of headdress, the golden edging around her, and the jewel. Look at the jewelry she's wearing. It is right out of this portrait. We gotta love Zeffirelli. He knew his Italian art. Continuing with different ways of depicting the story of Lucretia, Here is Giulio Romano's rape of Lucretia from the Palazzo del Te. The Palazzo del Te was basically built as a love escape for Federico Gonzaga, and it is filled with quasi-pornographic imagery. And here you see in the fresco violence, but not yet too in your face. But the engraving after Giulio Romano gets much closer to the violent act of rape. And we know Titian visited Mantua and was probably enthralled with Giulio Romano's erotic paintings and innovative compositions. And Titian goes on, we'll just see in 1 minute, to emphasize the rape scene as well. But just showing you again how popular these were, typical, repeated for decades of very violent, very graphic images of the rape of Lucretia. Particularly the Giorgio Guisi after Giulio Romano, look at his knee between her legs, or the Léon d'Avant, the rape of Lucretia. You see how the male is made powerful and violent as she kind of recoils from him. And often there's a voyeur in both the d'Avant and the Guisi. Someone's coming in and witnessing it. Is this her servant that he threatened to kill both of them and have her accused of adultery? And then we see Titian, his Tarquin and Lucretia, which was painted for Philip II. Titian was in his 80s when he painted this. And look carefully, he signed his name on her slipper, which is in the lower right. Clearly, his image is influenced by Northern prints, but we're in an entirely world of the sensualness of Titian and power of his color and the looseness of his brushstroke. So there is Tarquin in bright red boots or knee highs and red trouser. He is swooping in with the raised knife coming at her. She kind of cowers and holds him, tries to hold him back as he grabs her arm. Look how sensuous her figure is. She's still wearing her pearls, her kind of wedding jewelry. And again, we have an onlooker kind of standing in for us, the viewer, and the incredible lushness of the green velvet curtain, the bed covers, the painting, the incredible painting of the sheets. So Titian, for Philip II, ardent Catholic, I might add, is painting a very different kind of Lucretia than his earlier version. Now we're in the throes of the violence. I mean, just the way his knee comes thrusts between her legs. If one has, I would probably have to warn students that if you're sensitive, this is not a painting you should look at. And we as viewers, how do we respond? How did a Renaissance viewer respond? Where was this hung? This must have been for Philip's private enjoyment, because you really do feel like a voyeur watching something violent and yet so incredibly beautiful. And look at her face. I mean, Titian I'm thinking that maybe next year we have to do a whole class on Titian. I think I'm really falling in love with Titian, not in Lucretia's rape, but falling in love with Titian, and that how he captures the texture of the fabric and those tears and the highlights on the pearls. Her tears are like the pearls. And then this unfinished one, this one actually kind of creeps me out because Tarquin looks like a contemporary person. He doesn't look like a Roman, or he really looks like Titian had a specific person in mind, and the way his clothing seems to be splattered with blood. This is unfinished, but the violence has been increased, and it's so close to us. We're really as if we're in the midst of this violent scene. And then Tintoretto does something very different. And it's fascinating to me because he shows the movement or the violence by the breaking of her pearl necklace. Notice that it's broken around her neck and the pearls are falling down as we look. But somehow there is much less sense of movement, even though the statue, the bronze has been knocked over. It is much more of a display piece. Titian immerses us in the violence of the act, and Tintoretto's, as beautiful as it is, seems to display it for us without the similar emphasis on the violence. It's more of a display. And Veronese just eschews it all. He shows this incredibly beautiful woman with the dagger, and I keep looking at it. It looks to me like she's already started to stick it into her heart, because it looks like there's blood on the dagger, but she is resolute, and the violence has been completely diminished. And what we have is this extraordinarily beautiful woman, and the fabrics and the textures and the light make us, we don't feel guilty enjoying this image, but I still question, why do we need to be looking at a woman killing herself? And what inspired the patrons and the artists to depict this so many times? We're leaving Lucretia and moving on to Judith, a very different kind of heroine, very brave, equally seductive, beautiful, because, and you have the whole story. She, Holofernes, Assyrian, was threatening her village, her people, and she sneaks into the Assyrian camp, and she gets to Holofernes' tent, and supposedly it goes on for several days, and by the last day, she plies him with alcohol, pretending to seduce him. He passes out, and she takes advantage and decapitates him and brings his head back to Bethulia, triumphant, and she rescues her people. She is the counterpart of the Old Testament hero, David. We don't have any historical facts about this, but it was a fantastic symbol of female heroism. Really, the heroic quest on the part of a woman. She departs, she beats, and she returns triumphant. But typically in the Bible, she gets downplayed, because that in Ecclesiasticus it says, "Let us now praise famous men and our fathers that begat us." And there have been evolving two different interpretations of Judith: as a heroine who overthrew the tyrant and a symbol of civic virtue and Republican freedom, or as the femme fatale, the enchantress who lured men to their destruction. So Botticelli depicts two scenes, small, that were probably painted as a diptych, perhaps folding, and then later acquired by Bianca Capello, the mistress of Francesco de' Medici and later his wife. And so the stepmother of Marie de' Medici. And she had these two images adorning her writing desk, her writing cabinet. So again, why? The one of Judith with her handmaiden holding the head of Holofernes on her in a basket on her head is a beautiful image. I could live with that on my writing desk. But the other one with the decapitated neck, interesting that she would really want to look at this on a regular basis, but again, perhaps because it's extolling the virtues and the heroism of the female. And so Bianca Capello probably wanted to identify with this heroic female. The most famous 15th century version is, of course, Donatello's fantastic image of Judith and Holofernes. And I love when Florentines were debating over where to place Michelangelo's David in 1504. There was a similar and contemporary to the 1504 debate discussion about what to do with Donatello's Judith. And I quote this because I thought it was fabulous. The Judith is an omen of evil and no fit object where it stands, as we have the cross and lily for our emblems. Besides, it is not proper that the woman should kill the male. And above all, this statue was erected under an evil star, that would be Medici, as you have gone continually from bad to, as we have gone continually from bad to worse since then. So originally, Donatello's Judith and Holofernes was commissioned by the Medici, erected in their garden as a complement to Donatello's David that stood in the courtyard of their palace. When the Medici were expelled in 1494, the Florentine government sacked the Medici palace and brought Judith and Holofernes to the Palazzo Vecchio and erected it outside on what was called the Ringhiera, the raised platform outside of the Palazzo Vecchio. I find this an extraordinary image of female power. First, there is nothing voluptuous or sexy about Donatello's Judith. She is about as covered in heavy drapery from head to toe as she can be, in contrast to the rather sensual, scantily clothed Holofernes. And she raises that sword not for the first hit, but the second. She's already struck him once. She is completely in control. Her feet stand between his legs and on his hand. And let me just see, yeah, look at the contrast between the chastity, the chasteness, the virginal quality of her. Of course, Judith had been married, so she wasn't a virgin, but she's there a virgin type, but militant. This is the church militant, defending its people, defending its faith to this sensual, evil Assyrian general. And look at his torso, his long, curly hair, and look at where her feet are. One foot is on his wrist, and the other foot is right on his groin. She is in complete control and a symbol of civic republican virtue and power. And just briefly, Michelangelo included a scene of Judith and Holofernes in the spandrels of the Sistine ceiling. There she is covering the head of Holofernes, which is believed to be a self-portrait of Michelangelo. So thank you, Michelangelo. We don't have to see the bloody neck, which Botticelli shared with us. We have the sleeping guards, the head, and the body. And again, here, Judith is represented as a defender of her people and as the church militant. A very different kind of Judith, not surprising, coming out of Venice, is that of Giorgione's. And Giorgione is an artist we know very, very little about. He was incredibly influential, even though very short-lived, and much more introspective. Here is his Judith, again, like the Botticelli, which was then inserted into a writing cabinet. This was probably part of a cupboard door, perhaps paired with an image of David, not sure, we don't know. And here, this Judith is inward looking, as if she's contemplating what she's done. he has been strongly influenced by classical sculpture, so bringing the high Renaissance revival of classical sculpture to Venice. And there's also this wonderful, delicate sensuality of the way her toes kind of dabble in the curls of his head, of his hair. But very withdrawn, very quiet. This isn't the active heroine. This is the contemplative, virtuous Judith. Or again, Lorenzo Lotto or Palma Vecchio. Now we're getting into these sensuous women who were either courtesans or marriage paintings. And certainly the jewelry of Lorenzo Lotto's Judith makes us think more in terms of marriage. She's dressed in blue and white, possibly as an allusion to the Virgin Mary, but certainly her breasts are very prominent. And again, she looks out at us. I find this kind of not a very beautiful painting, but I wanted to show you this beginning of showing a less attractive foil to the beautiful woman, so that I'm going to be rude, pig-like female behind. This is a whole tradition that Leonardo did, showing his grotesques with the beautiful, so highlighting the beauty by joining it with the beast. And again, in Lotto, the emphasis is not on the violence. You barely notice the head. You're looking at these women as images of beauty. Similarly, the Palma Vecchio, his Judith is in this whole series that we'll look at when we turn to Venice of beautiful, sensuous women. And Titian did one Judith with the head of Holofernes towards the end of his life, seemingly unfinished, one that he worked on over and over again because there are layers of dirt when you x-ray it. And she looks like a portrait. She doesn't look like a typical Titian idealized beauty. And just his use of paint makes us just look at that head, and we don't have to see the details. We don't have to see the blood, because it's the physicality of the paint that reminds us of the act. And again, he's included an African servant. She hardly emerges from the shadows as this contrast to this brilliantly lit, idealized female. Tintoretto did a whole series of these Old Testament scenes as part of the upper wall decoration of a Venetian palace. And again, he emphasizes the decorative. We don't have to see the blood and gore. The head is still intact, but our attention is drawn to the shimmering light qualities and the fabric, the beautiful fabric of the two women. And here again, another Tintoretto. I'm really finding it fascinating that Tintoretto kind of makes things more decorative. And I hadn't really thought about that, because I always thought about Tintoretto's brushstrokes as very loose and almost impressionistic. But here he's elongated in the Mannerist style. He's elongated this figure of Judith and de-emphasized any of the violence. The head is off. The head is about to go in the basin, but there is no blood. What we're really focused on is the incredible fabrics and that beautiful blue dress of Judith. And Veronese and his beautiful women, again, we are drawn to her face. And again, he emphasizes her beauty by incorporating here probably a serving woman of color whose profile is not an idealized profile, so that her beauty is emphasized by what then was considered less beautiful. And she is dressed in these fabulous exotic fabrics, evoking the Middle Eastern location. And she is holding that head, not with revulsion. I think she's done it, and she's about to hand it to the handmaiden, and she will return to her people victorious. So who is she? Is she identifiable? What was the function of this picture? Was it a private commission? I would assume so. Where did it hang? Did it hang in a bedroom? Did it hang in a studiolo? These are questions I hope someday we can answer, because we would understand so much more of Renaissance attitudes and society's attitudes from that period. And we're going to be looking at women artists for the last two lectures. So I just wanted to show you Lavinia Fontana's Judith with the Head of Holofernes, basically to say, just because a woman paints it doesn't make it look female, or doesn't lessen the impact. There we have this bloody neck. We have a very powerful woman. So you would not be able to tell that this was painted by a woman artist, because she has all the skill and the power of contemporary male artists. So too with Fede Galizia. We're going to look at these in the second to last lecture. She stands there as this heroine, and again, her beauty highlighted by this old serving woman and that ugly head of Holofernes. She's decked out in pearls and exotic jewelry, perhaps marital jewelry. Again, we don't know the function of these images. And we will end with Artemisia Gentileschi and look much more closely at her Judith and maidservant in Detroit. And just as a comparison to a male version, Caravaggio's Judith beheading Holofernes, the difference here is Caravaggio makes Judith look miserable in doing it, drawing back like, oh, I don't want to do this. Whereas Artemisia has Judith as a powerful, forceful, engaged woman. We'll talk about this more. And I find this image really shocking in a way, because that portrait, I show you two versions. The one on the left by Cristofano Allori, Judith with the Head of Holofernes from 1613, he claims that this is a portrait of his lover who ditched him, Maria de Giovanni Mazzafieri, and she looks like a modern woman. I find, if I was given this in my PhD oral exam, I would have said it wasn't 17th century, just because of her face. She reminds me of a bit of Velázquez Rokeby Venus that is in the London National Gallery. So supposedly his head is the painter's head, and she is his lover who has rejected him. And just for fun, Kehinde Wiley has also painted his versions of Judith. And notice that she does not decapitate an Assyrian general. She decapitates a Caucasian woman. So African-American empowerment, powerful women. I love his wallpaper effect. I'm sure those flowers are very consciously chosen. I didn't have a chance to really look into it. It's a little creepy, but I understand where it's coming from, and I just wanted to bring the theme of Judith to the present. Okay, I think we're going to have to speed up a little bit. So Susanna and the Elders. Actually, it's one of my favorite stories. We're going to look at Susanna and the Elders in relation to Artemisia in our last lecture. But poor Susanna, beautiful woman, would bathe in her garden, and two lecherous old guys would spy on her and couldn't contain themselves, and went and accosted her and tried to get her to have sex with them. She rejected them, and they went and told the people that they had seen her sleeping with a young man. And then she was condemned, but she raised her voice to God, and God inspired Daniel, the prophet Daniel, to expose them and to save her. So this fascinating image by Lorenzo Lotto, an artist who always paints out of the box, and signed by 1517. It has two inscriptions. One, I would rather die than sin, so a la Lucretia. And the larger one, we bear witness that we have seen her lay with a youth who then fled. So this we know was a private commission, a cover for a portrait. Again, fascinating. Why this? This proves the virtue of a woman, of a bride, who is divinely justified. Against Danielle proves that the accusations were false. And Lorenzo Lotto is clearly inspired by this Venus, Hellenistic Venus statue. Or this one is not such a great Tintoretto, so we're gonna go leap right over this one and this one to this one. This is, I think, one of the great images of Susanna and the Elders. And just so you know, Susanna and the Elders is an excuse for depicting lecherous men looking at a beautiful woman. There's no doubt of that. And in this case, Tintoretto does it exquisitely. So here we have a slightly lumpy Susanna. Tintoretto did not truly understand female anatomy, but what we are drawn to is her beautiful head and her elaborate hair and that shimmering white skin as she gazes into the mirror doing her toilette. While, and of course, all those the hedges, the rose hedge evocative of Venus, and these two old guys who kind of extend the perspective, and one crawling like a snake up to spy around on her. So truly they kind of create this image of evil. And also he draws our attention, I think that's a fig tree against which she sits. So evoking the Garden of Eden, the sin of Eve, and the slithering snake of the elder. We are clearly the voyeur here. We are mesmerized by the beauty of her figure. Above her is a magpie, which was typically a symbol of deceit and evil. In the background near the distant elder is a family of ducks, like a dog. Loyalty, love, family. Roses evocative of Venus, of love, perhaps also of lust. Pearls of purity. And in the background on the left, we see a stag and a deer, which often was a symbol of Christ and of spiritual authority. So again, with this painting, we're kind of thrown into this ambiguous, contradictory state. We're looking at a nasty scene. Luckily, Susanna prevails because of Daniel. We are mesmerized by her beauty. But again, we're looking at this scene that evokes lies and lust and evil. So how do we justify? And this was probably part of interior decoration. Why? Did guys get together and discuss this? Because I don't see this as being particularly appealing to females, but I would love to discuss this further. And love these references that Tintoretto wanted to have the skill of Michelangelo in drawing. So here he echoes one of Michelangelo's Ignudi from the Sistine ceiling. And this drawing on the left after Raphael is after a very damaged fresco that was in Cardinal Bibbieno's bathroom in the Vatican. Very damaged state, but it was an intimate bathing room with a hot water and a bathtub and lots of erotic images. You can imagine what was going on in there. And here is a detail of the stag and the deer, and wondering whether Susanna wasn't somewhat considered as a symbol of Venice, which at this moment in time was being threatened by Suleiman the Magnificent. And the elders are perhaps echoing or referring to the threat of the Turks. I don't know, that sounds a little too political for me. I think this is more about beauty and voyeurism. Okay, who are we doing? Esther. I'm gonna leap over Esther. Sorry. Okay, I have to catch up to one of the most beautiful Esthers, this one. You know I love Veronese. And this is the crowning of Esther and the sealing of San Sebastiano. Esther here is absolutely a symbol of Venice. She saves her people. She's virtuous. She's chosen by Ahasuerus to be his queen. So here, there is not violence here, although he does kick out his previous wife. If we turn briefly to the Magdalene, I'm going to show you basically two images. You have here Donatello's image of the penitent Magdalene, who is clothed only by her hair and has been living in the wilderness, starving, penitent, repentant of her sins and missing Christ. This is an image of extraordinary power. It's painful to look at. She's haggard, she's penitent, reluctant, sorrowful. There is nothing of the beautiful woman here. But let's look at what Titian does. Hold on, I'm going to skip these. I'm going to skip this because I'm going to get to Titian. Here is Titian's penitent Magdalene. Do I compare her? No. All right, imagine, put this side by side with Donatello's version. This was commissioned by Federico Gonzaga as a devotional image that he gave to Victoria Colonna. Again, really, a woman wants this image? Interesting. And then she gave it to Eleonora Gonzaga, and in 1548, Vasari saw it in the palace of Guidobaldo della Rovere at Pesaro. So ultimately, it went from Titian to a male patron as a gift to a female poetess, Vittoria Colonna, who gave it to another woman, who gave it to her son, Guidobaldo della Rovere, who we will find out also loved images of sensual, beautiful, often unclothed women. And certainly we can give this a Christian interpretation, that she is blazing in her passion for Christ. But I think we also have to acknowledge that this is one of the most sensual, sexual images ever. A fiery, passionate woman, and far from the errant masses in solitary residence, appears to be joyous, leaving behind whatever is not pleasing to the true eternal beloved. But we've got to understand the complexity of this image and the popularity of this image, because Titian paints her multiple times. There's several of her clad only in her hair. And this one in the Getty, he starts to cover her up because the climate following the Council of Trent made the sensuality of this image no longer acceptable. More versions. where her penitence is emphasized by the presence of the skull and the emphasis on her red ringed eyes and the tears falling. And we compare the two. The one on the left, his first version, she's not suffering in the same way. She's inspired. She's passionately following Christ. And in the post Council of Trent, she's miserable and suffering, but not suffering like Donatello's. Okay, and oops, I wanted to end. I went too fast. Hold on. I wanted to end with one reason I love Venice. So I wanted to end with Titian's image of wisdom as a woman. This is in the ceiling of the vestibule to the Marciana Library. And this is one of these most, I think, inspirational images of a woman. They're engaged in reading philosophy. She's seated on a cloud, looking into a mirror. I'm not sure she's looking into a mirror. She might be reading a book, but since she has a scroll in her hand, that is probably a mirror. So she sees what's behind her. She knows what's going on. And this is where the Venetian Academy would meet. And it introduced the Academy to the library, which was painted with beautiful images of philosophers around the books. So here, Titian paints wisdom. She is evocative of Venice, and she is not presenting us with suicide, rape, or even sensuality, but this is inspirational, and I wanted to end with an inspirational image of a female. Okay. Are there, oh, yes, there are questions. Hold on, I have to stop sharing. Okay, sorry I had to skip over a few. One of these days I'm going to learn to either talk less or have fewer images. All right. Yes, thank you for my typo, Choo-Choo-san. Thank you. Another suicidal woman. The face of the man behind her is not exactly admiring and is looking at her, but rather expresses desire. Oh, that's of the Titian. Yeah, I agree. Titian's Lucretia, I think. I agree. While Titian's Lucretia is beautiful, there's no sensuality in her. I have a hard time looking at any of Titian's women without seeing sensuality. The woman always pays. Yes, unfortunately. No, which cradle? In the Susanna? You have to unmute yourself if you want to say something. Lotto, that's the Susanna. Hold on, let me get it up here. She's above the steps go down to a bath. She's kneeling. Her shoes are to her left. That's a pile of her clothing. So I'm going to stop the share because I don't see a cradle. So put it in. Okay, cradle. Can you either? I agree. All right, unmute yourself. Tell me what you think. Why you think it's a cradle? You can't unmute?
No.
Oh, yeah.
There you are. Go, Debbie.
Okay. It's Portrait of a Woman. And you mentioned that there was a chair behind her.
Oh,
and
yes. Okay, no, that's the Lotto.
Yeah, Lotto.
I think that's Savonarola chair. But I can see why you thought it might be a cradle. If you Google Savonarola chair, I think you'll see that's a chair.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Do we have any viewpoint of why these were so popular? I mean, if they were wedding images, rough. That's not how I would want to start a marriage. but then starting a marriage, arranged marriage, wasn't much fun either. But real emphasis on the marital virtue of the woman, this bizarre marital chastity issue. So Titian next time. I think Titian next year. So yes, I want to find out more. I want to understand what these images are. There are a lot of scholars working on this now. There's been such a change in understanding of these images of sensual women and what their function was. It is no longer assumed that if it's beautiful and sexy, it has to be a courtesan. So that's progress, right? And think about Philip II wanting, or that rape scene. I mean, it's just like a little icky, but that's the world we live in too. Okay. All right. Next week we do, I have to tell you, I have been called for jury duty. I will find out Friday after 5 what I have to do. So if I get stuck with jury duty next week and I can't do it on Tuesday, can we we'll go into the first Tuesday of March. I apologize, but they tracked me down. So hopefully I will escape, but if I'm called, we will email it out to all of you, and then we'll not meet next Tuesday, but the following Tuesday.
Perfect.
Wish me luck. Okay?
Good. Yeah. Good luck.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye, everyone.